slap in your face.
Okay, please do.
All done.
All right, that's fun.
Hello, BSides DC. Come on. that was most of an applause. You know, I'll take it. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. He asked to be introduced as the ridiculously handsome Chris Cox. He's the executive director of Operation Safe Escape. Put your hands together for him.
All right. He told me that I could be introduced any way I want to, and he stuck to it, so I appreciate that fact. So I want to thank everyone for coming out. I know there's a lot of great tracks, and I appreciate you spending time with me today. Before I get started, I do want to give a trigger warning. I will be talking about domestic violence and abuse. There will be no triggering images, as best as I could, and I'll be sticking away from very particular specifics. But of course, it is a difficult topic to talk about, but also an important topic to talk about. So this is me. I need to update my picture. I know that, but it's the last picture that I really liked. I'm Chris Cox. I'm the executive director of Operation Safe Escape, also formerly the founder of Operation Security Professionals Association. In the past, I've been a cybersecurity instructor for DoD, the chief information officer of the Department of the Army National Training Center at Fort Irwin, and of course, today I do the pro bono work with Operation Safe Escape. And I want to make sure this is a name, this is a face that you remember, because here, for the first time ever in front of this BSides audience, I'm going to do an amazing feat. I'm going to blow your minds. I'm going to do not a trick, but something that's never quite been done before, but I do need an audience to do, what's the word I'm looking for? Volunteer to do that. First hand to come on up. You don't even know what it is. It could be a really bad thing. Oh, okay, I appreciate that. Can you confirm that we have never met before?
We have never met.
We've met. Well, it's good to meet you. My name's Chris.
Aaron.
Aaron, good to meet you, Aaron. I'm sorry, I don't have a microphone for you, so you can just talk like towards my chest, and it'll pick you up.
Okay, I'm Italian. I can do it.
Okay. So, Aaron, can you confirm that you have a personal email address, a Gmail, Hotmail, CompuServe, AOL? I think that's the 4 that really exist.
Yes.
You do, okay. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to successfully guess in 3 tries, and you have to keep me straight because I lie. So 3 tries, both your username and your password.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds pretty far-fetched, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm so confident, I'm confident to the point of arrogance, that if I can pull this off, you will win my personal Raspberry Pi 4.
Oh.
Yes, which
If you can't pull it off, I get it.
If I can pull it off, you get it.
Okay.
No, wait.
So my username.
Okay, wait, hold on. I think I walked into something here. There we go. If I cannot pull it off, you get this. If I can pull it off and successfully determine username and password, we cancel the rest of the talk and just go through your personal emails for the next hour.
Deal.
Okay, I like her.
Because I'm
Okay.
very bored.
So 3 tries, keep me straight. Try the first. Give me your username and password.
No.
Okay, she said no. But that was my first try, so I still get 2 more, and that's fine, because I'm about to bring out the big guns here. These ones never fail. Give me your username and password, please.
No.
Okay, I did say please. You all heard that, right? Okay, she's not playing along, but I do get 2 more try. 1 more try. Okay, 1 more try. That's fine. I can do it. Give me your username and password, please, with a cherry on top.
I like sprinkles. No.
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, I guess I lost a Raspberry Pi. That's really embarrassing. I thought it would work, but now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I'm not surprised, because she actually had no reason to give me her username and password. I had no leverage over her. Obviously, she wasn't intimidated by me. I didn't know anything about her. So I guess I really couldn't have expected it to be quite that easy. What we're going to talk about today is instances where it may be, where that may be enough in order to successfully compromise someone's system and, in fact, their life. So I'm going to explain APTs are less of a threat to me, less of a threat to the individual than a personal advanced persistent threat. Than an individual that has some sort of personal motivation, that has a desire, that has the time, that has the nothing else to do except to compromise someone's system or someone's life. So I would argue to say that we talk about, a lot of us do this professionally, work for corporations, work for government, whatever it may be. And so we know what a security program looks like. So when we compare it, we talk about who would win between this well-funded and comprehensive security plan with encryption, with technology, with a lot of money, with some equipment and everything else. And you put all that, you compare that against Stephen, who walks in with that totally real work order and just gets in right in your data center. Because, of course, there's the person element. When you take away all of the equipment and everything else, the ones and the zeros, the things that blink and bloop and everything else, it's harder to protect people. It's harder to protect against real people. So we compare against what protects our data. So in the sense of our companies, when it comes to our personal lives, when it comes to the things that we're trying to protect, our information, just throw things out for me. What can we use to protect our information and systems? Oh, nobody knows? This is the wrong group. What are some things that we can use at our companies or personal lives? What protects our data, our information? Encryption. What's that? HSM. Yeah. Two-factor training. Right. We have a lot of things. Say again? Silence. Yeah, shutting up, right? That works. I agree. Big fan. I don't do it very often, but I agree. There's a lot of things. Now, to be fair, I had more time to think about it. We have certain constitutional rights to protect our data. The 4th Amendment, the 5th Amendment, we have all these things. We have encryption, we have passwords, we have physical locks, we have strong men with guns and signs and access lists and everything else. We have laws, we have biometrics, we have all of these things that we can rely on when we go to work or when we lock up our computer or whatever else the case may be that will protect our data, our resources. Those lights are very bright. I got to stop looking at them. When we're talking about what actually protects vulnerable populations, specific to this conversation, victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence, they have less because their threat is closer. So we're talking about the apathy of the abuser. We have to consider how closely is the abuser actually looking. Do they have reason, they believe, to start looking at access logs, at phone records, things like that? The cleverness of their defenses. We're not talking about strength of the defenses. That goes out the window. We're not really concerned. We're talking about when the threat is in your home and shares a computer and shares a bed. We're not really worried about encryption strength. There's not much of a difference between 1024 and 2048 and whatever else the case may be when you're trying to protect data where the adversary is very, very close to home. So we're talking about cleverness of defenses, hiding information, not necessarily protecting against brute force, at least in the technical sense. And the reliability of those around them. At some point when someone is trying to escape a domestic abuse situation or a violent situation, they have to trust other people. They have to trust law enforcement. They have to trust the family friend that can take them in. If those people also don't know, no matter how many precautions the individual themselves has taken, if those other people don't know what they need to protect, if they don't have that same mindset, they can end up inadvertently helping the adversary. And we've seen that before. We've seen that happen through our organization. So a few key facts, a few things that I consider to be axiomatic that the rest of this presentation really is built upon is number one, that security generally relies on both secrecy and access to establish permission. That is that in order to establish permission to a resource, to a system, to information, you have to have both of those things. You have to be able to keep a secret, and you have to have access to implement that secret. So a password, for example. You have to be able to keep that password to yourself, and you have to be able to actually put it on the system in a way that it can't be overcome. You need both of those things in order to establish permission to a resource. But then both of those things, secrecy and access, can be overcome by proximity. The closer the attacker, the adversary, whoever that may be, to the target, to the data, whatever it is, the harder it is to maintain secrecy, the harder it is to maintain access to those resources as well. A dedicated, persistent threat is more likely to succeed than a random attack. I think we all see this all the time. A dedicated attacker is far more dangerous than a random script kiddie just trying to throw out whatever they can find. When someone actually wants your information, when someone actually wants something from you, they're more likely to succeed because they're going to expend more time, more resources, take additional risks that a random attacker wouldn't necessarily take. You see this a lot with physical security. So if you were to go on YouTube and you were to look up home security tips and things like that, it's generally by some police department that says, here's how you protect your home. You put these lights on, you put one of those alarm stickers on your window, because those are as effective as actual alarms, really. Bars, things like that. Take that key out from under the mat. Like all these common sense measures that are designed to make you a harder target. And that's what the information is really geared towards, because that's the way that in the security community as a whole, we tend to think, whether it's physical security, information security. We say, let's make ourselves a hard target so that the bad guy will go to the neighbor. And that's fine, because I don't like the neighbor as much as I like me. So we try to get them over to someone else. We try to make ourselves a harder target. But that falls apart, and what we're failing as a whole to address is what happens when the adversary, the burglar as it may be, doesn't care about the alarm system, because they know they have 3 to 5 minutes at best before the police show up, and their plans are going to be completed within those 3 to 5 minutes. They don't care. So they're far more dangerous at that point. And what is known can be discovered. There's a lot of ways that you can discover something that's known. We see this in the news all the time. If you know a password, there's certain ways that can be gained from you. That can be gained via force. You can be compelled to give it up. You can be threatened. You can be coerced. You can be tricked, whatever else the case may be. The adversary can look under your keyboard. They can find where it is. There's a lot of, like mine. There's a lot of different, I'm kidding, by the way. There's a lot of different ways that what you know can be overcome because of that proximity. So I just want to talk about the scope of the problem for a minute, because everything else I need to impress upon you this is an actual problem that we need to address. We're talking about 6 million men and women impacted by intimate partner violence annually. That's 1 in 7 men, that's 1 in 4 women. A lot of times we don't talk about just how pervasive that problem is. Does anyone work for what they would consider to be a large organization? Several individuals? Maybe there's some people that work for government, maybe some people live in a community. Whatever the case may be, you live around other people. So the reality is that a lot of the people that depend on you for security information, advice, the apps you develop, the security solutions you put in place, the guidance you put in place, whatever it is that you do where other people depend on it, statistically speaking, you get enough people together, and some of them have this unique threat model that we're not as a whole prepared to address or not properly addressing. So we have to consider those as we develop our solutions. 1 in 6 women, 1 in 19 men have experienced what would be called extreme stalking in their lifetime. So that's where we really start talking about privacy, hiding information, OPSEC and OSINT, and how those work together and everything else, because we're talking about people that are living, that are afraid. We're talking about people that someone is following them, it may be online, sending them a lot of messages, maybe coming to their house. This is something that's pervasive in their life. And then 25% of dating teens have been harassed by a partner. And of course, dating teens, or teens in general, tend to embrace social media. They're online much more than a lot of us that are older than teenagers grew up on. And so the digital life extends into other areas of the actual life. So this is a much greater impact than it may be when some of us grew up. So just to use an example, I'd like to talk about Anna for a second. Anna, at the when she got married, at about the 3-year mark is when the abuse started to occur. Red flags started coming up. This was an individual we actually worked with. Anna is not her that she had. That didn't end when she left, and it rarely does in these types of situations. So we met her after we really kind of started looking at what there actually was. We found 16 of her online accounts were compromised: email, social media, her Domino's accounts. She's petty. We did find 2 unknown devices on our network, and that bugs me to this day. This was a while ago this happened. There were 2 unknown devices that it was easy enough to kick off the network. You just change the Wi-Fi password. It's not on there anymore. Not a big deal. But we never actually used the word male privilege. But I would say that there's a lot of different types of privilege that we have to consider. For example, immigration status, where if you leave me, I hold your green card. I hold your residency. If you leave me, you go back to where you came from. The person is afraid to leave. It's also talking about just traditional, whatever the role is within the household. I make the decisions because that's my role. And we'll also talk about how that works with literal admin privilege. And economic, we saw that as well. There's a lot of ways that tech could be used in order to leverage and further economic abuse also. So intimidation, the goal of the abuser here is not to actually get into accounts, not to actually try to compromise devices or whatever else the case may be. It's sending that message. I'm still here. You can't get rid of me. Hacking into accounts but not quite getting in. You know how some accounts, they have this very, very, like 2-factor authentication. Someone said it back there. That's a great way to protect your accounts. But what does it do when someone tries to log in without your password? It sends you a message that someone tried to log in. Abusers can weaponize that because it's a way of saying, I'm trying to get into your accounts. I'm not worried about getting caught. I'm doing it overtly, but I'm still here. You do it at 2 in the morning, wake the person up. It's a bad thing to do. And then, of course, obvious monitoring versus more covert monitoring. Emotional. So the goal of the abuser when it comes to emotional attack is to isolate the person. It builds on isolation because they want the person to use the word crazy. They want people to use the word crazy. And I say that not in the pejorative sense. I say that that's the word that they want to hear. They want the person to say, I think I'm going crazy. They want the person to say, for their friends around them to say, they're kind of crazy, he or she is crazy. Don't listen to what they're saying, because that insulates the abuser from the act, and it starts to not only harm the victim, but protect them. Sometimes it's a matter of getting in and doing certain things, but then removing the traces that those things have been done. This happens to me all the time, is that when something's not working and I try to show someone this frustrating thing is not working, that's when it starts working, right? Like you get in, you're like, I can't log in, this site's messed up, and then it starts working again. If that were used intentionally, that makes the person start to doubt themselves just a little bit. And then, of course, subtle changes, IoT. What's the old joke is that if you want to remember what it's like to be hacking in the 90s, you hack IoT today. Not too much different. But so IoT can be used. You have all sorts of different devices that are connected to the network now. It not only does it increase your attack surface, but it increases different ways that can be used to attack a vulnerable individual. Like, for example, thermostats. When it's a case where the abuser was the one that set up, when the adversary is the one that set up the thermostat, they may still have access without the maybe less tech-savvy individual knowing that's the case, depending on where that technological disparity falls, which side that falls in on. So getting in and changing the temperature during the day just a little bit, making it a little bit hotter, making it a little bit colder, things like that. The Vatican, you might saw this in the news, Vatican released a web-enabled rosary, or the rosary beads and things like that. Turned out to be a little bit vulnerable. There's just so many new attack surfaces that can come in, and and the dedicated persistent threat, our APT at home, is trying to find new ways to leverage that. We talked about isolation. It's a matter of controlling the access to the devices and the resources. You often see this while the abuse is still ongoing, while the two are together, or while the relationship is in place. So it may be a matter of locking the person out of their accounts as a form of punishment. You think about situations where you may live in a rural location. I used to live in a town called Albany, Ohio, which was as rural as it gets. It was about as big as this room, and about a quarter of the amount of people lived in it. Not much there, not much to do. So if you live in a location like that, technology becomes your lifeline. That's how you get information, that's how you get news, that's how you talk to your friends and everything else. So in a case where that phone is taken away and the computer is taken away as a punishment, and I'm not exaggerating, this is something that happens, as far as I'm taking this to work with me because you did this act, then that person is effectively isolated for that day. It can also be a matter of impersonating the victim, locking out their accounts. Impersonating the victim, this is happening right now. There's one individual that I'm working with where their abuser, their adversary, is running their Facebook account. Everyone that tries to communicate with this person through their Facebook account is actually talking to the abuser. Now, of course, you'd say, well, just report it with impersonation. This is the conversation we keep having, is just report it. There's a report button, say impersonation and everything else. But what does Facebook do? They email the account on record, and they say, please prove who you are. And the person says, sure. Here's my driver's license. Here's my birth certificate. Here's every piece of documentation that I still happen to have. So it becomes very, very difficult in order to overcome this, much more so when it's an individual that's trying to get their life back on track. We talked about privilege. There's a lot of different forms of what is referred to as privilege, but I'd like to talk about literally admin privilege. You know, you think a lot of you may be sysadmins in this room, or you may work for organizations where there is an IT staff. And you think about what would happen if your IT staff hated you. They can do a lot of damage to you, right? Because at my workplace, in my day job, I don't have admin access to my computer. I can't install apps. I can't take apps off. I can't change configurations. I rely on someone else to do that. If that other person had something against me, they could do a lot of harm to me. They could impact my workday. They could impact my ability to do my job, to communicate. They could theoretically change my files. I'm about to turn something in, or I'm about to send up a report that says, here's some things that are true, and then other information makes it in that is not true. I look foolish. I doubt myself. So having that administrative privilege, either remotely or in person, you can do a lot of harm that way. You can prevent app and software installs, prevent wiping logs. So if the person wants to try to get help, try to look online, try to look for resources, and the abuser's already configured the computer, so they can't do that safely. And then, again, preventing configuration changes that could be used to do that. Economic attacks, this is something that I recently changed it. It said poisoning the wall for the longest time. I've recycled this slide, go green, and it should be poisoning the well. We talked about that earlier with Anna, who had her potential employers already knew about her. The well was effectively poisoned. And this is something that if you have someone that has a lot of time, has a lot of motivation, can cause harm that way. Can interfere with the job hunt, delete emails, things like that. And then also IoT and account attacks. I put that under economic attacks because you could spend a lot of money if your heating is running all day long. And then the AC comes on to cool the house down again. You can really drive up that bill in the month that it'll take to figure out what's going on. And then what I call kind of technical methods, not really technical attacks, but kind of leverage, kind of work in that realm. But things to make sense of is crowdsourcing the abuse. So you see it, there's like these doxing sites, there's some of the chans, there's some of these other types of doxing locations where someone will say, this person did a bad thing. It's not just a matter of, hey, help me abuse this person. It's never that overt, rarely that overt. But normally it's, this person did a bad thing. They kicked puppies, they did this bad thing, they hurt these people. Here's their information, go to it. And it's not that hard to drum up a witch hunt on the internet. It's not that hard to kind of mobilize that some of those communities in order to harm another person. So what that does is that effectively isolates the abuser from the abuse. That makes it far more difficult to detect, and that raises the impact. That increases the impact on the individual. And police as a service, which is where the police are actually weaponized. My device has been stolen. I pay the bill. Help me find it. Happens to them all the time. I just had this conversation with NYPD. And they're familiar with it. They know what happens. There's not much they can do about it except to try to figure out what the actual truth may be. But again, they're overloaded, so they're used in that way. A couple challenges to the victim themselves, a couple things that impact them is when you have things that are accurate but unlikely. It's rare that the average abuser is going to burn a 0-day in order to harm their victim. Those are expensive, and there's other ways to do it. But then again, so when you have someone that is trying to figure out what's going on in their lives and they don't have someone to help them put it in the proper context, they're going to start looking at things. They're going to start hearing these news articles, seeing these things on the news, and they're going to say, well, wait a second, someone else, you know, China or whatever, whoever, just broke into this person's iPhone and did these other things. They're going to see these types of attacks that can happen, but they're unlikely in this scenario. But lacking the context, possible is equated with probable. So we see things. This is the case where the bounty hunters were buying up all the location data. That can happen. It's something that is not that difficult, but it's not something we actually also see in the wild that often either. WebMD, everything means something. WebMD, if you're all familiar, it's where you look up your symptoms. And if you focus on it from a symptom perspective, then everything becomes much more meaningful than it would be otherwise. So I do it myself. I go to WebMD, and that's not true, I'm lying. But if I were to go to WebMD and I say, I have a stomach ache, I have a kind of lightheaded and everything else, I start looking through, because I'm looking at it from a symptom perspective without the context, some symptoms seem to make sense. I try to fit them in. And then I find out I have hysterical pregnancy because I lack the context. Same thing with your car. If your car is making a knocking sound, you try to diagnose it yourself. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not even all that smart. And so I look in there and I say, knocking sound means this. I need a new engine. My car's shot. Because I lack the context in order to interpret the symptoms. Information overload. So even trying to put all that together, even information that may be accurate, just get too much information, it becomes a matter of paralysis. And then manipulators, they manipulate. It's what they do. So we see cases where when the individual is with their abuser for a long period of time, they hear it every day. I can hack into all your devices. Don't even try. I can see everything you do. This may not even be true. Oftentimes the abuser's an idiot, but they can lie really, really well. They manipulate, and that's what they do. So I had an individual one time that I had worked with where I said, okay, let's first establish those safe communications channels. Go ahead and go to your local library, go to a random computer at a random library, create a new email address, and sit down. I felt that was a pretty good solution. And she said, that's not going to work, because as soon as I do, he's going to hack it. And us in this room, we're like, that's not going to happen. But if someone's been told every single day by someone that appears to know what they're talking about, I can do this thing, then they're going to believe it to be true. We need to talk a little bit about threat modeling. So there's kind of 3 different factors when it comes to this particular audience. There's the individual devices that they have up to their router. There's the cloud, the internet that everything passes through. And then there's the resources they're trying to hit. So for the individual, that's where they have the fewest resources available generally. Like most people don't have a private IT staff, but the most often attacked. Then you have the cloud. Sometimes the ISPs get attacked, but not really for this particular case. So that's pretty safe. They follow the same rules. They're pretty well protected. And then you have the other side where a lot of the websites they may be going to, the shelters, the safe houses, the adversary, the groups that are trying to help them, they have better resources, more people, less often attacked, but it does happen. But we really need to focus on the individual themselves because that's where the risk is. So when we're talking about developing solutions, there's three different kind of models that I look at. The one that we in the security community or the IT community have a bad habit of looking at is, here's a vulnerability, let's develop a countermeasure. So we look and we see, okay, there's a new vulnerability in Windows. Believe it or not, that happens once in a while. And so we need to put a patch together. So we look at the vulnerability, we look at the countermeasure, and we're done. If we're getting a little bit smarter, we look at, here's multiple vulnerabilities, and they may work together. They may impact one another. They may have an impact on one another. But let's include the adversary in that equation. What are they likely to do? Is it something they're still likely to use? And then we develop a countermeasure. If we're really smart, we're looking at multiple vulnerabilities. We consider the adversary plus the behavior of the users, plus the skill level of the users, what they're likely to do. And that's where we start to develop countermeasures with all of the information for a more holistic approach. This applies very, very cleanly and well to this audience. Some of the common attacks. How am I doing on time? I don't. I'm good. I think lunch is after, so I might just keep talking. You all can be late for lunch. I'm fine. I eat beforehand, so I'm good. So some of the common attack methods that we do see, we are seeing more and more stalkerware in the audience, in the clients that we work with. I won't bother defining it because we all know what that is. Stalkerware, spouseware, spyware, whatever you want to call it. This is something that is actually being used because it's just so easy. It used to be once upon a time that you had to have some level of skill, some level of knowledge in order to compromise someone's phone. Now there's pre-built solutions. Now, of course, some years back, a lot of them got sued. They got in trouble, so they changed their marketing, where they said with a wink and a nod, they said, you know, this is only used to protect your kids because everyone loves their kids. Won't you please do it for the children? And to protect your employees. But there's still those pictures, there's still that data, that latent code on their websites that still say what they're actually expecting people. They know what people are using this software for. So even though they say don't use it for these illegal purposes, it'd be illegal, don't do it, we're protecting ourselves, we don't care about the customer. I mean, they'll cut the buyer free, which is good because the people buying it are the problem. But even though they have these disclaimers, they actually don't care. I did an experiment myself. A lot of people have done these experiments. You can do it yourself. I went on one of their websites, and I got into their support chat, and they're quick to respond. They're right there with support. And I said, hey, I made up this lie. I said, I think my girlfriend's cheating on me. She has her phone. I don't have access to it. But can I use your software to find out if she's cheating on me? So translation, I said, can I use your software to commit a major felony? And they came back and they said, yeah, of course you can. It's really easy. Here's some instructions, and here's a 10% off discount code. There was absolutely no, they didn't mention don't do that because it's kind of a jerk, that's a lousy thing to do. It's highly illegal. You'll get caught because people are getting caught. You'll get arrested, and you're just a bad person. None of that was mentioned. It was just, yeah, give us your money, and end of transaction. We're also seeing more data exposure and doxing, which is kind of a form of revenge. It's also kind of a threat. It's saying that if you leave me, I'll do this. So it's used in order to exert control over the individual. Account takeover, so of course we all know what that is, but I draw a distinction between account takeover and device takeover. The two are often equated. So if you have an individual that is not a technical person, doesn't understand necessarily the threats of the technology, they may come to you and they say, my phone got hacked, and that might not be the case. It might be their Facebook account got hacked, or their Gmail, or whatever the case may be. I would say that we see a lot more account takeover than we see device takeover. But again, that's where we have to listen to what the people are telling us and try to figure out which is which. Impersonation, we saw that in some of the previous cases, where it's a matter of impersonating the victim's identity for one reason or another. And then IoT attacks, and I have that as a special case, is because we put more and more things on our network without realizing what that might mean. And so if you have someone who maybe they're not the ones that put these things on the network, but maybe their adversary is the one that did it, they can still have access into the home. And that becomes tricky because as you're talking to someone, often not face-to-face, maybe someone that you know remotely, you're saying, well, what devices do you have? And they say, well, I have a laptop, I have a phone, I have this. But then you have to ask, well, do you have a toothbrush that talks to the internet? Do you have an IoT thermostat? Do you have all these different devices? Does your fridge connect to the internet? I can't keep up. I do want to have a sidebar because this is something we really, really need to talk about when it comes to primarily account takeover. So these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if my math is right, most common password reset questions. These are the ones that it's asked when you set up an account. We've all seen these, that it says, answer these. So if you're ever locked in, if you ever forget your password, we can get in there and you can reset your password. One of the most common being mother's maiden name. And for that, by the way, we can thank banks in 1882. They used that to protect telegraph information, or banking via telegraph. So you're right. The idea is that if you're sending money to someone far away, that person far away probably doesn't know your mother's maiden name. It is a fairly reliable way to protect that secret. That was 137 years ago. I have never banked via telegraph. I've not done that once. I'm not that old. But we're still using that same question. And also name of your first pet and things like that. These are all things that those close to us probably know about us. They may have met the mother. They may have been there for the pet. They may have grown up together, lived on the same street, whatever else the case may be. So these are useless questions. And so what do we do? I'll tell you what, here's my answers. These are my actual answers. That's my mother's maiden name. It's all there. Feel free to write it down. It's not going to do much good. It's stuff you can find if you want to dig a little bit. No pictures. I like that guy. So it's something that is not hard to find if you really, really wanted to, or if you spent any amount of time looking. But of course, like all of us, I lie. I lie a lot because I'm not going to put this actual information. I'm not going to protect my accounts with this information. So I use false information. I use my password manager to keep track of my lies. But these lies at least. But sometimes I've heard, like in conversations, that we tend to laugh. In this community, we sometimes laugh at the people that answers these honestly. We say it's dumb that they're doing that. But they're just trying to be honest. They're getting the question, and they don't have that same mindset. They don't know they should lie about those things. And so maybe instead of some of us that may be laughing at those people that are doing it, maybe we need to tell them why that's a bad idea. And in case you didn't believe me, that's the actual excerpt from the 1882 document that suggested mother's maiden name as a password for financial stuff. Bad idea. So we start looking at what the solution sets need to be. For this particular audience, we're talking about someone that may not have a lot of money, may not have a lot of skills, of experience with technology. It has to be easy for them to use, whatever it may be. Free and inexpensive. It has to be secure and hard to detect. You can't create new indicators based on what you're trying to do to help. And you have to make the assumption that the device is going to be searched, The changes will be noticed, and the detection may be dangerous. Again, that depends on knowing the individual's threat model, what their actual situation is. So if you're recommending solutions to someone, you have to keep these things in mind. I'm going to skip past that because I think I'm running kind of short on time. I'm so good? I have a lot more to go through. I'll come back if I can. So we're talking about like a typical solution set in terms of when we're working with an individual. This is kind of what we go through. And I'll give you a moment to like soak all this in, because we're trying to consider, okay, so we do this. What happens if we do this? And what does it indicate to the abuser when this changes and everything else? There's a lot of different branches, a lot of different things that we need to consider. But I would say just focus on 4. If someone comes to you for help, and they may, first thing you want to do is establish those secure communications. So they need to have a safe way to talk to you if you're going to help them with a security measure. So if they're talking across insecure communications and it's being intercepted, whatever you tell them is just going to be, number one, they're going to know that someone's trying to help. That can make things more dangerous. But on the other hand, any countermeasures that you try to put in place are going to be counteracted. You're going to be in that game of cat and mouse, and you're going to lose it. Develop security measures. Once you can talk safely, talk about what they need to do. It's not always our solutions. The ones that we in the security community tend to say, this is what you need to do. That doesn't always work for millions of people. For a lot of the people that you're developing apps for, or software for, or in your companies, those typical solution sets might not work for them. So we tend to say, for example, stalkerware generally requires physical access to the device. Protect it. Use a good password. Use a good PIN. And that's the advice that we throw out, and we set it and forget it. But if, again, we ask the same question, if you're not allowed to have a password or a PIN, that advice is useless. Ensure a safe destination. So once you can so this is depends on how much one is helping, but this is kind of the way we look at it, is that once they can protect themselves, once they can get out, they have to have a safe place to go. So it may be, for example, a shelter, a safe house, who may not have the same security countermeasures in place that we do. You know, I come from a DoD background, as you saw in my introduction, so I'm worried about protecting facilities, shelters, safe houses, things like that, often run by retired social workers, healthcare workers, retirees, not security people. So you're saying you're in the situation where, honestly, they'll get compromised down the fact. Have to move again is the best case scenario. Particularly effective, and through that, particularly effective is you have your secure email. Oftentimes, the email is one of the first things to get compromised. So we say, create a new account, nothing to do with your old one, new username, not your real name, and everything else. And then that way, there's at least a safe way to start having that conversation. Two-factor authentication, ideally hardware-based two-factor authentication. We've had a lot of success using Tails. We've worked with their development team to increase the level of safety for the type of people that we work with, which is awesome. Because if we're talking, there's a computer in the house, they share the computer. Remember, they're told every single day, I can see what you do. Don't even bother looking for help. I can see what you do. They're not going to trust that device. Best case, one potentially they may try anyways and actually get caught, which is bad. Or they don't try because they're too afraid to try, and that's bad too. So giving them a way to say that that talisman, that magic bullet, that whatever it is, to say you can plug this in and this is going to protect against that, then that's going to at least make them feel safe enough to start having that conversation. Regular scans is good because a lot of the antivirus manufacturers are picking up on the stalkerware and how to detect it. Burner phones, of course, are not just for drug dealers and spies anymore. So it works really well if there's concern that the phone itself is compromised, which occasionally happens, and it'll get them to the place where they can get a new device. And of course, organizations like ours where we want to help. So I would say that if you show yourself as a safe person, people are going to come to you. So if you are known as someone that can be trusted within your friendship circles, within your community, within your companies, when they know that you're someone that has information, when they know that you're someone that can be trusted because you've been saying things that indicate you're a trusted person, they are going to come to you. So when they do, first off, listen without judgment and be patient. Because a lot of times the people that you're talking to, they don't understand technology. They're going to say things that don't seem to make sense. There's going to be a while for them to build up that trust level. Sometimes they're so done with it, they just want help. So they're saying, here's all my username and passwords. Please figure out what's going on. But other times, you're going to need to be patient as the person tries to explain what's going on. Remember that sometimes if someone's come to you for help, they're desperate. They may have been told for years and years and years, you're crazy, nothing's really happening, you're trying to cause trouble, you're drama. They've heard these things over and over again. The audience that we work with, they have to fight really, really hard. So they're tired of fighting. They just want someone to help. Don't ignore the ghosts. And I say that literally. This is not a metaphor. Don't ignore the ghosts. There's one individual that I worked with some time back that she came to me, she says, I know this sounds crazy. And right away I hear the word crazy. I'm like, it's probably not. She says, I know this sounds crazy, but my dishwasher sings songs to me. My pets have turned against me. And I feel like I'm being watched and followed all the time. Now, you say that you go to any random person and you say, my dishwasher's saying to me, my pets have turned against me and I'm being watched, you might get institutionalized. You might get, they're going to say, this person's crazy, I'm going to go the other way. But in this case, she was right. She was 100% correct in that her dishwasher had an IoT component that her abuser set up. It was singing to her. Her pets didn't hate her. Her pets didn't hate her. They were just tired because it would get hot during the day because the thermostat was set up high. And she actually was being watched. So don't ignore those ghosts. The things that don't make sense are often the things that are most important. Learn the actual threat model. So is the threat model 5 hackers named 4chan that are highly skilled, highly adaptable, and able to get in there and just work together and everything else? Maybe. Not very common. It's not very likely, but maybe. More likely it's someone that's lied to them, someone that downloaded some tools off the internet, maybe someone that hired someone. So try to figure out exactly where the person may be, the threat model may actually be. And then once you figure all that out, if they come to you for help, recommend reasonable solutions. We tend to think, like sometimes we think, well, this is a great opportunity. This is new, let's put all this encryption in place, and these passwords, and these hardware lockers, and like all this stuff. Maybe that's not something that'll work for that person. And sometimes even recommending those additional models can start to make the person be a little more concerned. They're like, why are you putting these things in place? Is it that bad? So you really have to have that kind of that personal touch and understand that maybe the same threat model that we do in our day-to-day life isn't what's going to apply for someone who has a unique concern. And then I would, just about at the end, I think I'm still doing pretty good on time. 10 minutes, this is great. So I would beseech you, the thing that I would, if nothing else, is that each person in this room, you guys are the technology haves. The people that have spent a lot of time learning these skills, understanding the threats, understanding the aspects of technology. You might be red team, you might be blue team, you might be somewhere in between, but you have information that other people need to stay safe. And so you have an opportunity to be that evangelist. I told you before, is that instead of, as some people, I'm sure no one in this room, you all look like very, very nice people, but as some people do, they laugh at the people who got hacked. They say their password sucked. It was Hunter 2. It's not gonna protect you. That one's all over the place. And so we tend to like look down on the people that made those errors without saying what did we do to help them. So you can be that evangelist. You can be that annoying person that says, hey, your password's written down. Stop that. Because that might annoy people, but at the same time, those are the skill sets that they need to stay safe. If you talk to 100 random people, go out on the street, talk to 100 random people, and just say, here's some information. 19 of those people are going to be either have been, are being, or will be impacted by intimate partner violence or domestic violence. That's a pretty, it's not hard to talk to 100 people. I don't know how many people I'm talking to now, but if you talk to people at your, but it's not a lot of people. So if you talk to people at your workplace, in your community, wherever the case may be, is that you're going to impact people that need to hear what you have to say, but they might not have known that there's someone out there that can help them. They might not have had any inkling that maybe some of the things that they're seeing are actually happening. So someone's struggling. About 19 people out of 100 are struggling and can use that information. Be an advocate in the InfoSec and the dev community. So a lot of times, the information has to go both ways. So we're talking before about how you can share that information with the vulnerable populations that need it, which is great, which is a wonderful thing to do, because that's the security community talking to the survivor community. But it should go both ways. So a lot of the models that we're putting into place when it comes to the security solutions and the tech and everything else, we need to be that voice of the people that maybe don't have that direct line. Be the voice of the people that try to look at new things that we're developing or new things that we're putting out or that we're aware of and think, how can this be misused? So I was on, of all things, I came back from New York. I spoke at some domestic violence conference on this topic, and I ended up taking the megabus because I'm an idiot and don't like my time. And, but it's great because I sat down to this woman and we started talking. She says, oh, my sister's an app developer. You talk about IT and everything else. I say, what's she work on? And she says, it's a great app to keep children safe so parents can find them at any time and the children don't know they're being tracked. And I'm like, oh, let's talk. And so I asked some more questions, and she says, oh, yeah, my sister put this together. It's for kids. We want to keep kids safe. And I was like, I'm sure you do. You know, I'm sure that your heart is in the right place. And I ended up on the phone with her sister somehow on the bus going down wherever it was. And I'm like, this is a really bad idea. Stop doing what you're doing. And she listened to a degree. I hope she actually listened, but at least I know the development company name so I can keep an eye on things. Because I'm curious and I'm nosy. So make sure the information goes both ways. When you're coming up with something new, try to think about if I were a bad guy. This is foundational to OPSEC in the purest sense. What is actually called OPSEC, the whole process, depends on looking at things from the bad guy's perspective. And in what I do, that's distasteful. It feels bad because I'm thinking, if I were a bad guy, if I were an abuser type, and this is the way I saw the world, what would I do? It's not a pleasant feeling to even have that thought process. But we have to do it. We have to at least consider and say, if I were this bad guy, how would I misuse this technology? How could I get in and harm someone? Because that's how you can start to develop those effective countermeasures. Find a cause and fight for it. That's just general. You know, maybe it's this particular cause, maybe it's something with EFF, maybe it's something with whatever else the case may be. But once again, I think there's a lot of really smart people in this room. Some of the talks that I catch, like, I don't know what I'm, like the last talk, I have no idea. I work with that guy, and I have no idea what he's talking about. So there's a lot of smart people. There's room for you. Whatever it is that your area of expertise is, there's room for you to help other people. If you have time, consider it. Use what you know for good. So there's information that you have. There's things that you can do. You can use it for good or bad. You know, you're the one that has to look at yourself in the mirror. You can use it to do good things. And that may be just keep doing what you're doing, developing great tools, developing great security solutions. Or it may even go further than that in terms of actually helping people to avoid abuse, to avoid being harmed by these forms of technology. But just don't use it for evil. Above all else, what Google used to have in their rule set is don't be evil. They took it out, but keep it in yours. And before I go on with that, I just do want to, because I have a couple more minutes. 5, plenty of time. So to kind of give an example of what we're talking about, as an example, there was this planning app that we became aware of, and it's a printout thing. It's really, really cool. It's really, really smart. It's this tool that it's this paper checklist. And you print it out, and it says, what's this information that you need to be concerned about? So it's made for people that are escaping abusive situations. And so it asks questions like, when I leave, this is the first place I can go. This person said they'll take me in for 2 nights. This person said they'll loan me some money. This person said, this is where I have my money hidden. This is my code, or things like that. And that's important because when you're doing the scariest thing in your life, you're going to forget everything. So having it written down is good. And it says right at the bottom, hide this really, really well. And we looked at that, we were like, how well can you really hide it? Because maybe you can hide it at work, maybe a safe deposit box, maybe you're fortunate. But if anyone hides it at home and it's found, a lot of people are put in danger. Because abusers, it's about control. When they start to lose control, they lash out. So you don't want to put people's names on that piece of paper. So we said, OK, how can we solve this problem? So we look at it kind of in an iterative sense. Because it's an OPSEC background is where it's coming from. So we said, how do we solve this first problem? First problem is it's dangerous if found. So first option was, let's digitize it. Let's just put it, most people have phones, most people have computers. Let's just put it on a computer. That'll solve that first problem of being found. People can have it with them on their phone. They don't have to worry about it so much. We look and we say, OK, so we're aware that's going to cause more problems. Because you're having new apps, you're having new icons. These phones are searched. We're aware of this. So that creates a new problem, which is fine. We knew that. So we say, OK, so we can solve that problem by passwords and encryption and things like that. So even if the person knows it's there, they can't access it because it has strong encryption. But of course, they'll ask for it. It's not a situation where the person's likely to be able to say no. So this new icon, password protected, that's going to be very interesting to the abuser. So we say, now let's solve that last problem. And we included an element, without going into too much detail, we included an element of obfuscation, where the app says it's doing one thing. If you know how to get into the secret portion, that's where everything is. So there's that plausible deniability, that strategic misdirection, where there's other ways to get this app. It's primarily distributed through the shelters and the safe houses and other secure channels, where you can say, here's this specific tool, but it doesn't necessarily stand out. And so there's other ways you can get it. You have that plausible deniability, much like Tails, where you can say, I got this some other way. And that solved that particular problem. So with that being said, going back in order, I do have just a minute or two, but if there's any questions, I'd love to answer them. Couple, great. Gentleman in the back, black.
Do you ever get confronted, or does the abuser ever come after the organization, or does that really not happen?
Sometimes. It has happened. I've been called so many creative things and gotten so many creative threats. My personal favorite is "you big stupid." I need to frame that one. But yeah, because that is what happens. That's why for law enforcement, domestic violence calls are among the most dangerous, because it's the abuser losing control, and they hate losing control, so they lash out. So in the cases where they've known that we're involved, that I'm involved, it's been exclusively online. It's been a lot of just angry messages. We haven't been too worried about it. Some things we have had to report to the police, but generally speaking, they haven't gotten too close to that. So most of the volunteers, we're an all-volunteer organization, remain kind of pseudonymous anyways. I'm one of the unfortunate fools that has my face out, so that's me. Yes?
What can application authors, service providers, and other such folks do to make their applications and products safer or resistant to these kinds of attacks?
Can I have another hour for that? Do I have time? No, there's a lot to consider there. But mostly it's a matter of looking from that mindset of what am I creating? How can it be used for evil? One of the ones that I really want to highlight, because more and more apps are being either created or misused to track the individual. New laws are kind of being developed to approach that. New York's doing a really good job with that until they screwed things up with bail, but that's another issue. But so more and more they're requiring, the apps are voluntarily alerting the tracked phone that it's being tracked. Google does that now. Find My iPhone does that now because they knew that the bad guys were using it. So it's a matter of thinking from that distasteful perspective. Behind, I think there's a question.
Yeah, is there like a structured information packet that is available, and maybe not because of counter operations, but as part of your outreach to folks who are survivors, do you also include counterintelligence mechanisms like maintain normal communications? If you talk to your mom once a week, keep doing that until things have changed.
Yeah, so the question is that do we provide that type of information about the non-technical things? And yes, so this conversation is about the technical forms of abuse, but we focus on the wide range, all the security disciplines from counter intel. A lot of the people that are volunteering come from like a DoD intel type background, so they're providing that type of information, physical security, and the whole thing. So we do, for each client that we do intake for, we do kind of go over that wide range of topics. Yes?
So at least in the two case examples that you gave,
Uh-huh.
it seemed like folks were in relationships for a relatively long period of time
Sure.
before the abuse began.
Uh-huh.
Given that, are there things that we should encourage friends and family to like just generally do to protect themselves in their relationships, such that if they ever unfortunately find themselves in that situation, they're already set up in a good way? Like, I don't know, should they not have family plans on their cell phones, or what are those things, if any?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So the question was, is that what should we in general be doing before we get in this situation? So that's where general privacy concepts come into play. That's where we have a chance to become advocates for privacy. But it's a matter of kind of setting yourself up in a secure way, compartmentalizing information. Again, I say it, I'll use the polite euphemism, strategic misdirection, but I lie. So it's okay to give VoIP phone numbers instead of your actual phone number. Giving your actual phone number, that's like the blood brotherhood now. When I was a kid, if you're giving someone your actual phone number, that's because like, you should really trust them. Most everyone else has my VoIP. Fake emails and things like that. But compartmentalize. Figure out those layers of trust. This is who I really trust. This is who I kind of trust. And these are the new people that I'm meeting, and kind of people have to work their way through the circle. I did see a question there.
Yeah, what skill sets are you looking in your volunteers, and how is the best way to get involved?
Well, I don't like people that take my Raspberry Pis, so I'm just saying. I would invite you to, I'd like to talk afterwards. I have plenty of business cards to give out. But also on our website, we do have a volunteer form. That goes straight to our intake team where they can kind of pair people up. We do need volunteers. We are an all-volunteer organization. So any skill set, ideally the technical skills are in high demand because in almost all cases we deal with, there's some sort of technical component. But whatever the skill set is, if you're a graphic designer, if you're someone that can make pictures, if you're someone that can help write information for the clients to work with, there's a place for everybody. So whatever it is. Yes, sir.
I'm going to stand up because my voice is a bit low.
Okay.
I hope everybody can hear me.
I'll repeat the question.
What do you find, what do you do when you find yourself close to the abuser, and especially when they don't see it as meaningful, or they don't see it as important as they're doing, so such as logging into different accounts unauthorized, or having different passwords, or just saying it's part of the relationship, so on and so forth. How do you get them out of that situation for the victim and the abuser?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So you're saying, what's the process for getting someone out of the situation?
Yes, if you are close to the abuser and the victim.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a really good question. So the question is that if the safe person they come to, if you happen to be close to both the abuser and the victim, that's a really crappy situation to be in because there's like the emotional entanglements. It's hard to determine who to believe. So really, it's a matter of automatically having a trusting stance with the person claiming abuse. That doesn't necessarily, was there?
And the emphasis mainly relies on the abuser not seeing it as an important issue. Like, say they have access to the accounts,
Yeah.
but they just see it as a regular part of the relationship, and that they're not doing anything wrong because if they do find something, then it's justified.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the question was is that if the abuser doesn't see that it's wrong, that they have all the passwords, that they control all the access to information and everything else. That's a really hard situation because there's kind of an education component. Sometimes we have an opportunity as people where we can say this thing that you're doing is kind of a crappy thing to be doing, stop it. Or this is kind of controlling. But that can be hard to do when you're close to the person. So really that kind of depends on kind of taking that step. If you see something, say something that it's wrong. But also at the same time kind of letting the victim in this case know that there's resources available to help them. Not necessarily trying to force them out of the situation. That might be our temptation is to say, you got to get out, let's go. But that can't happen until they're ready. So you need to start planning that information.
And would the situation be similar if you weren't as close to the victim?
If you weren't as close to the victim, so if you're closer to the abuser, wow, that's a really good question. So he is raising the level of difficulty here. So if you're close to the abuser, but not so much the victim, at that point it's still a matter of we kind of have a duty, I would say, to at least call out the behavior that we're seeing. We need to call out toxic behavior. And that has to come from anyone that is in a position especially to do so. If I may, 1 second. Thank you. So if we're in a position to do so, we have to feel free to call it out. We have to have that integrity to call it out. And it's hard to do, and it sucks to do, but it's kind of our obligation to do. Yes, ma'am.
It's actually about their question.
Yeah.
I have a psych background. The thing is, abusers, if you ask them, are you doing this to be abusive, they'll say no. But if you ask them in other ways, they admit that they know it's abusive. They just won't say, yes, it's abuse, but if you frame it other ways. So the thing is, if you know the abuser and they're saying, no, this is just how relationships are, odds are they know perfectly well that what they're doing is wrong. And they're not saying that to you because they know that you would judge them if they went, oh yeah, I'm totally controlling them. Or
Yeah.
whatever. So honestly, at that point, it becomes you might want to involve a professional.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I do know, one more question, please. Sorry.
You focused a lot on domestic abuse, and I was just wondering, and I'm not sure what we might use for the term of like commercial abuse, where people are facing abuse by their coworkers who may have gained access to their phones.
Oh, yeah.
Decided to harass or stuff. Has your organization looked at those kinds of things and helping people in those situations where they're facing a hostile work environment and having to deal with some of the same things?
Yeah, we tend to see a lot of periphery, crimes on the periphery of that. Our initial scope was domestic violence, intimate partner violence, what we focused on. And then we started seeing that a lot of the issues are similar. So we do work with, what's the word I'm looking for? People that you know, types of violence or abuse or harassment, human trafficking, stalking, harassment, things like that. So a lot of the same concepts are transferable. I do know that I've kind of infringed on the goodwill of my hosts and pretty much eaten into your lunchtime. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Appreciate it.